We now get to listen to 4 elite thinkers from around the world from diverse pursuits. I will open it up by turning to each one of you for opening remarks. What I'm really interested in hearing from all of you is, what is the one data point or trend or phenomena underway right now in your world that's a source of optimism and one that's a source of concern? And I'm defining, for the purposes of this discussion, your world as, for Marc, sustainability, ESG and environment; for Professor Roubini, global macroeconomics; for Ritu, global markets; and for Rich, AI and all emerging technologies. We'll start from you, Marc.
Thank you very much. Well, rapidly, because so what excites me in sustainability at the moment is, well, we're finally past we've discussed the goals, we've discussed the disclosure in investments, we've discussed all of these things, and now we're into actions. We're actually, last year we had, just in renewables, the capacity of production in renewables has risen by 50% just last year versus 2022. So we're now positively engaging, even in my fund, we're actually looking about, okay, yes, we need to reduce our carbon footprint, but we actually focus on getting more and more green assets and low carbon assets, and how can we participate in the transition? And that's key. What scares me is actually, if there's no transition in the global south, there will be no transition. If there's no transition in the north, there will be no transition. Well, last year, and for that to happen, for the transition to happen in the global south, you need hundreds of billions to go into the global south in terms of new infrastructure and the like, to actually adapt and mitigate. Last year, there was a negative. There was an outflow of capital from the emerging markets by 69 billion. So we're going in the wrong direction. And we did not succeed in doing this when the inflation was low, when the interest rates were low, and when the geopolitics was a bit calmer. And now we need to do it in a very different context. And last year was the proof that it's so difficult. So that scares me, because there's a question of trust between the north and the south, and the geopolitics of it that comes with it. So that's the more negative part.
Anything that's a source of optimism and joy?
The first part, that actually we now are discussing, when you go to COP last year in the UAE, the discussion was not so much about the goals and everything, it was about the how. And for the first time, the private sector was there in a big way, and the private sector, we look at it as an investment opportunity. And I think that is a game changer, and that will accelerate the transition, and it's going to be good for all of us all around the world, and for investors like us. Just to give you the example, I mean, we were the first out of the gate in actually calculating our carbon footprint. We're now really out of the gate because it's important for us to how we invest and what we invest in, but also what do we do with our portfolio companies. And actually, we're now engaging with our portfolio companies to make sure that not only that they transition, they become best in class, because we think it's value creation, but it is actually very important for asset owners to engage. That's where we'll have the biggest impact, is helping others reduce their carbon emission.
Professor Roubini?
I would say that on the positive side, I would argue that the global economy most likely is going to achieve a soft landing. The concerns that there will be a recession following the tightening of monetary policy have been proven incorrect, in part because the negative aggregate supply shocks that occurred during COVID have been reversed. And on top of it, I would say that the AI revolution is going to lead to further positive aggregate supply shocks that increase productivity, economic growth potential, and reduce cost of production. So that's feeding in the right direction. Recently, however, I wrote a a column that was titled Artificial Intelligence versus Human Stupidity, arguing that there is many problems that are actually man-made, that are getting worse. We have a process of excessive deglobalization is leading to protectionism, and that's going to fragment the global economy. We have a geopolitical depression that has both political, geopolitical, and economic consequences. We are reshoring and front-shoring, but we're emphasizing economic security over economic efficiency. Aging of population may reduce growth and increase cost of production, and other restriction to migration from south to north, from poor to rich, that kept the lead on wage growth. There are a variety of other stagflationary shocks that are inflationary. We saw the resurgence of inflation in the last few years, and the combination of climate change, pandemics, geopolitical depression, restriction to movements of goods, capital, labor, and so on, cyber warfare, and a backlash against a liberal democracy is leading to populist policy are all stagflationary factors that reduce growth and increase the cost of production. So it's a tug of war between technology leading us in the right direction and lots of other things leading us to negative aggregate supply shocks. I think that over the medium term, technology is going to dominate, and therefore the future of the economy globally is going to be bright if you can address also some of the side effects of technologies. But in the short run, those stagflationary forces may be more dominant and hamper economic growth and increase actual inflation.
Ritu?
Thank you. I represent a world of investments and capital markets. And in our world, the glass is always half full and half empty. And there are equal number of people usually on either side, and that's what keeps the markets going. How I look at it, not to repeat the points already made, they're all very significant trends that also impact capital markets. Sustainability is an interesting way how capital markets are going to be shaped in future. I think that is something I positively look out to, because capital, institutional capital, has been seeking sustainable businesses. Now I see a trend where even private capital is seeking sustainability. And hence, for businesses to sustainably have capital flow, they will need to be sustainable. So I think that is significantly impacting the way the world will be. It's just not a fad anymore. It is what will attract and the capital flow and impact the capital flow. So for me, that is something I look out for as a positive. In terms of things that make us nervous or things that we look at with great anticipation, besides the points already mentioned and things like too long, high interest rates high for too long, etc., I think US elections will really impact capital markets in a very significant way, and we are with great anticipation looking at how US chooses their leader. And I think that will have a significant impact, not just on the US economy and capital markets, but on the global. It will have an impact on the trade flows. So that's a very significant event that we are looking out for.
Over to you, Rich.
So on AI, is this on? Yes, oh, now it is, great. So on AI, well, I guess I'd like to just start by building on Professor Roubini's comments. I'm really optimistic at the opportunity that this is going to present, and we could have a long discussion around that. I'll focus on three things. One is, I think it's going to turn out to be a boon to education and to give every child and every adult around the world opportunity for customized, tailored paths to grow skills and to really achieve their fullest potential in ways we can't yet imagine as we really unlock this. Second, I'm so excited about the ability to deliver better health when you combine AI with the various diagnostic tools and other things. I think it's going to have massive impacts on improving health, particularly in parts of the world with less access to top-tier medicine or medical advice right now. And then third, the world I'm closest to, I think we're seeing in the business world really a period of enormous learning about how to actually capture value from it. Of course, there's a lot of hype when a new technology like generative AI first comes out, but as we see companies now really digging in, they're realizing three things. One, it's really about how do you pick a few areas where you can have major impact rather than peanut buttering. Because two, the people part of it is extremely challenging. extremely challenging. Predictive AI, the AI that we've been dealing with for the last 8 years, maybe touched 5% of the workforce in an organization. These technologies can touch 50% of the organization. And so it's going to be extremely important to really get value on that. And 3, there's enormous opportunity not just to deploy tools, but to really reshape entire business functions, develop new business models, and I'm excited about that. That's the optimistic side. On the challenge side, I would highlight first the need for responsible AI frameworks, both at the business and at the societal level. There's a lot of work. Brad Smith wrote a book, Tools and Weapons, where he talked about every technology can be used for good and for harm. This is a very powerful one. There's a lot of learning left to do. Second, there's a huge amount of reskilling and upskilling that's going to be required for workforces all around the world. And I think that many, many companies are struggling to figure out how they're really going to help their people take full advantage of these technologies. And I'm optimistic we'll figure it out, but I don't want to underestimate the challenge. And the potential to leave people behind is very real. And that's going to take a lot of work to help bring everyone along. And I think that'll have bumps along the way.
Thank you. I want to come to you, Professor Roubini, for the first question in the second round. On the question of, many people are of the view that asset prices are at stratospheric levels in many markets. Fed is expected to cut rates, and typically when that happens, more money will flow into these exact, or more money will chase these exact assets that are already seen to be overvalued. What, in your view, is going to happen? Will there be even more money chasing already overvalued assets?
Well, I would try to distinguish between maybe the U.S. stock markets and other ones, because price-earning ratios are quite high in the United States, driven by big tech, but they've been somehow depressed, for example, in Europe. They were very depressed for a long time in Japan. Now they're recovering. And they've been depressed for the right reasons in China because of their own economic difficulties, while they're rising overall in India. There's a country that's growing very, very fast. So is there frothiness in some parts of the equity market? Probably yes. Given the disruption that AI is going to provide under some scenarios, U.S. potential growth by the end of this decade could be above 3% as opposed to the current 1.8%. You could argue that that might be justified. As long as the economy doesn't go into a recession, there is a soft landing. As long as the Fed cut rates, probably these valuations that are high are going to remain high. You can have corrections of 10% more, like it happened even in August, and then a reversal, and such correction have occurred even in the last year or so. But to get the real bear market in the U.S. stock market, you need a recession. And for now, a recession would not be my baseline. My concern will be more broadly that there is excessive amounts of debt and leverage throughout the economy. During the GFC was households and traditional banks. Now it's more corporate sector and shadow banks. Of course, governments from US, Europe, around the world are highly leveraged. And there are also forms of hidden leverage in various parts of the financial system. So if a shock were to occur when there is an economic contraction, that amount of leverage together with a P&L shock, with balance sheet stress, could lead actually to significant amount of distress. And what we've been doing in the last decade is every time there is a financial shock, we bail out the system. We did it during the GFC, we did it during COVID, we did it even last year when a couple of small commercial banks in the US went bust, and then we guaranteed even the uninsured deposits. And that leads to a situation of moral hazard where people believe that when things go right, you appease it, and when they go wrong, you come to backstop them. And that type of moral hazard leads to excessive leverage and risk-taking that eventually build up leverage that once a real shock occurs may lead to a significant financial distress. So that's something to keep in mind as a risk.
Ritu touched upon the US elections as a source of concentration of risk. You touched upon the same during your own remarks this morning. Could you touch upon, how should we look at it? Like what specific areas would be of most concern as risks emanating from, depending on which way the US elections go?
Well, if Trump were to be elected and if he were to follow strictly what he says he wants to do, would impose 10% tariffs on all imports coming from everywhere, including friends and allies, up to 60% on China. He may try to devalue the value of the dollar to restore US competitiveness. He may make the Fed less independent. That could be inflationary. He might want to make permanent $5 trillion of tax cuts in a situation where deficit and debt are very high. And the combination of those policies, in my view, will cause higher inflation, lower economic growth, could lead to a significant increase in bond yields and even a correction in US stock prices. If he does what he says he wants to do, the good news might be that he might choose economic advisors. They're going to make him warn it that the stock market, the bond market crash will not be the best way to start his new administration, and therefore either he does it or market discipline is going to force him to behave in a different way. But if you take at face value what he wants to do, those sets of policy look quite risky, as opposed to those that would occur if Harris were to be elected, that are more mainstream economic policies. Of course, the US has a fiscal problem, regardless of who is going to come in power, but at least Harris wants to raise taxes to pay for some of those tax cuts and create the spending, while in the case of Trump, large fiscal deficit might become even more severe. So that's another risk to keep in mind.
Ritu, let me come to you on from US to China. The buildup of debt levels in China, as indeed it happens anytime there is a buildup of that kind of stress in any part of the world, there is, some potential for spillover. How do you view fund flows getting impacted as a consequence of a kind of eruption in some kind of, debt levels in China or events relating to debt?
Sure. China definitely is within Asia Pacific and even globally a center for close monitoring and concern. There are various points of stress in the economy, debt overflow being one of them. The entire financial setup has been under pressure. Fortunately, it's a closed economy where the government and the regulators have a lot of levers still with a currency that is well managed. So while India should benefit, is the obvious fallout for China's stress, and I already see institutional flows into India significantly rising. The fact that we are making our way as a larger share into indices is helping. So China remains under stress. India is structurally well poised to benefit from that stress which China is witnessing. We have all the fundamentals in place, structurally strong, the economy is growing well, resilient. So I think China's loss, as is often said, could be India's gain.
And how do you view the trend of retail investors going into the Indian markets in a big way? Is that beneficial in the long run? Is it leading to some unrealistic valuations?
It is actually a very interesting trend. In past, when FII sneezed, the stock markets plummeted. Last few years, the amount of retail flows that we've seen in the market, every outflow from FIIs is more than counterbalanced by domestic retail flow, which is very heartening. The fact that our market cap is 146% of GDP now shows the confidence that retail as well as institutional investors still have in Indian markets. So I'm pretty confident, and I like this trend. At the same time, this has created a bit of froth, be it in IPOs, small caps, and that is a case for worry, because if we see any kind of stabilization, the market's at 24 times forward, so it's not inexpensive. And if we see some kind of a fallout of US elections or other economic, the geopolitical stress and other economic impacts on India, we might see retail investors impacted and hurt in the bargain, because they are significantly invested in small caps.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. A big round of applause for our panelists, please.